Andrew Scheer is a member of Canada's Parliament, leader of the Conservative Party, and a leader of the official opposition. He joins us to discuss the North American Free Trade Agreement. Mr. Scheer, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
Tell us first about your trip to Washington. I queued up the idea of NAFTA, but tell us about the delegation you're traveling with and what you hope to accomplish.
Well, we are focused on NAFTA on this trip. It's very normal for members of Parliament from Canada to come and visit with their counterparts here in the United States. We've got a great relationship on everything from energy to environmental issues to border policy. But right now, NAFTA is looming large in the minds of Canadians. And so I'm here with a delegation representing our party's experts on certain fields. So, for example, we have our what we call shadow ministers for trade, for agriculture, and for the Canada-U.S. relationship, and that touches on a lot of different issues, as well as my deputy leader. So we've got a good delegation. We're engaging with our elected officials, the counterparts on the elected official side, but also with a wide variety of people who represent various industries, who represent companies here in the U.S., because we're really trying to promote the idea that NAFTA is good for both countries.
And I understand you're keeping alive the tradition of presenting a unified Canadian front while you're here.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we have a partisan system in Canada, like the United States. We have different parties that we believe, our party has a better vision for Canada. But on something like NAFTA, there is a surprising amount, what may be surprising to some around the world, there is a surprising amount of consensus in Canada on NAFTA and the benefits that NAFTA provides to our economy. And so we believe it's essential that when we are here in Washington that we say, okay, we may have our differences, but we're going to leave that back at home because we want to make the case for NAFTA. So when we're down here, we're not talking about the differences between our two parties. We're trying to highlight to Americans, to congressmen and women, to senators, and also to people who might work in various fields, that NAFTA benefits them too. That this is not a system whereby Canada only does well if the United States does not do well. We both do well together. We both prosper together. So let's not lose this agreement that allows that to happen.
What are some of the specific areas that you're highlighting in this regard, in essentially countering some of President Trump's narrative that this is not a great deal for the U.S. and needs to change?
Yeah, well, that's a big part of it because, for us, the frustration is we can understand any country within an agreement wanting to make the agreement better. There may be some things that over time need to be improved or modernized, if you will.
Well, there was no internet when NAFTA.
Exactly. There was no internet. You weren't buying and selling things off Amazon. We weren't having things shipped overnight to your house. The digital economy was much different. The intellectual property issues around what people are creating and selling on the internet were all different back then. So of course there should be opportunities to modernize or make it better. But the idea that somehow either country or any of the three countries would be better off without it. And that's what we're here to counter, to say, look, any particular industry or company or sector could look at the agreement and say, here's how it could be better. But I don't believe for a second that any of us, any of the three countries would be better off with nothing. And that's what we're trying to get people to focus on, that the jobs and growth that have come on both sides of the border have come thanks to NAFTA. It allows those goods and services to move back and forth, and we're telling that story. For example, we're telling the story in the auto sector. That's an issue that President Trump is focusing on in rules of origin, and we're telling the story of, do you know how many times some components of an automobile might go back and forth across the border seamlessly because we have that integrated supply chain? If you break that up, that's going to have a very negative effect on auto workers in the U.S. So we're trying to build that case along with it.
So you see the win-win, or I guess in this case win-win-win, as not just possible, but almost essential.
It is essential. I mean, it's essential. The idea that any country can just cut off, put up more and more trade barriers and somehow be better off, it just doesn't ring true, and it hasn't been proven to be true over the course of the history of our two countries, of our three countries. So that's part of what we're here as well, to say let's not look at destroying this agreement that has created so much prosperity. Let's focus on the positives that have come along with that, and work to improve what is already working for both of us.
The nature of change is that something changes, obviously, right? And so what's the risk-reward equation from Canada's perspective? In other words, are there areas where this can improve for Canada, or are there areas that you're a little concerned because it's working now, and if it's changed, it may not work as well?
Well, there are areas I believe Canada would it would be much better for us if we could integrate some things into NAFTA. For example, we go years with an agreement on softwood lumber over, and then we have that agreement expire, and then there's a round of confrontation, and it causes a lot of issues in our domestic industry. We mentioned some of the innovations in digital commerce and intellectual property. That it would be good to have some certainty around that. Harmonization of regulations would be another area where you could say, okay, companies that are buying and selling goods and services back and forth are going to know that the framework in Canada is going to be similar to that of the United States. So those are some areas that we could absolutely agree on should be explored. We believe that things like the dispute resolution mechanism is important. It's important to provide certainty on both sides of the border. It's worked well for both countries. So those are some areas. But again, to go back to and say, we would not be better. We would not have experienced as much growth over the past few decades if we didn't have this agreement.
What is your sense of the status of the negotiations and the prospects for a successful outcome?
I do believe, and first of all, one of the reasons why we came down here was to get that assessment for ourselves. My party is following this very closely. We're speaking with a lot of our counterparts, we're reading all the media reports, but sometimes just being on the ground and talking to a lot of people over a course of a few days, you get a better sense.
Sure.
So that's one of the reasons why we came down here. What we're hearing is good news and bad news in some respects. On the one hand, I have got the sense that the threat is real, that there are a lot of people that realize that this is not just idle chatter, that the prospect is very real. So that makes it very serious. The good news for me, though, and the message I'll be coming back with, is that the level of engagement here in the United States is high. For those people who support NAFTA, for all those who recognize that the United States is better off with this trade agreement, that they are getting more and more engaged, that they are letting their elected officials know that, hey, we can't lose this agreement, that we'll all be worse off without it. That engagement is high. We're up on the radar. Where the awareness level of the fact that not just that I'm here with this delegation, but that the Canadian government is engaged at this a very high level. And I get the sense that there's a growing partnership between Canadian companies who do business on both sides of the border and American companies who do the same thing, saying, okay, we need to work together here. We need to make the case for this trading agreement that has benefited all three countries.
Beyond NAFTA, your general thoughts on U.S. Canadian relations?
Well, it's one of those things that often may get taken for granted because we do have so much that we agree on. Around the world, we are on the same side of many, many issues, whether it's promoting democracy and human rights, whether it is, tackling some issues that affect the world, regional security. We're partners in NATO. We have exchanges with our armed forces. We have so many things that we hold in common that sometimes some of these trade irritants or disagreements do loom very large because it's normally a very good relationship. So I think on the whole, the relationship between our two countries is very strong. There are areas of cooperation that we can expand. We met with a congressman today from New York, right along the border. There are issues around border security that are interesting for both sides for both countries. But I think there's a solid base, but it's something we can never take for granted.
We talk about it less in this country for obvious reasons, but what about Canadian-Mexican relations?
Well, in our country, it seems very, very, very strong. We have a great relationship with our Mexican counterparts, and we really do believe that NAFTA is a North American deal, and that all three countries benefit from it. We have a lot of goods and services moving back and forth. The United States is the larger economy, and so sometimes that presents challenges to Canada that are also felt in Mexico. So sometimes, we feel like that in some ways we're facing some of those same challenges from a similar perspective. But I think overall, the North American situation is hopeful. When we look at what's going on around the world, it's important that we maintain that. You've got a lot of trade blocks developing. You've got obviously Europe has had reduced impediments to trade within Europe for a long time now. We see this happening in Asia now. So it's essential that in North America we maintain the same thing. Otherwise, we'll be much less competitive versus some of these other trading zones that have emerged.
Final thought on just Canada from the outside looking in. What we see is a country that's been doing well economically, growth has been pretty solid, that you have a young political leadership, a generation of political leadership. You're 38 years old, is that correct?
Right.
Prime Minister's 45 years old, Trudeau. What does this say? Is Canada moving into a new generation of leadership, and should we expect new things from Canada?
Well, it's very interesting you mentioned. I am the youngest of the main
when you were
party
speaker,
leaders.
the youngest ever, 32
That's right.
years
Yeah.
old.
I was Speaker of our House of Commons at the age of 32. All three party leaders will be on the younger side. I like to point out that the current Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, will be the old guy in the next election. But I think it's a sign. I think Canadians have always been open to different people from different demographics, old, young, east, west, new Canadians from families who have been there for longer. It's more about the ideas and the vision for the country. So I believe that it's going to be an interesting election because we'll have three leaders from a different generation that has led Canada before, and all that goes along with that. So it'll be a fascinating election to watch, and for anyone outside of Canada who likes following these elections.
We'll be watching.
I think next one will be a good one.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us. I'm glad that our countries continue to have terrific relations, and you still have the best national anthem in the world.
Well, thanks very much.
Thanks for joining us.
Appreciate that.